Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here on this topic for fearless love. All of the things that you've been talking about with us, I'm going to kind of try and bring into kind of a relationship focus, okay? So I want to start by telling you that I met my husband when I was in high school. We were waiting for a band rehearsal, and I was helping with his math, which I take full credit for because he's the one that ended up as an engineer and I did not, but I helped him. So I make sure everybody knows that. We started dating in high school and went to separate colleges on the opposite sides of the Mississippi, but kept dating. And at the end of college decided that this was right. And so we got married. Had 4 children, we're involved in church, we're like really involved in church. My husband's a knight, we've taught religious ed from babies to high school. In fact, we're currently involved in the middle school program, and my husband is really popular because his boys always have something to do with destruction or explosions or crushing or muscles, So in fact, a couple weeks ago, I don't know if Samantha knows this or not, a couple weeks ago, he somehow managed to bring a 3-man slingshot into a lesson on Jesus' death and crucifixion. So somehow he managed that Jesus' death and crucifixion was obviously connected to sin, which then connected to Adam and Eve, which connected to an apple. And the apple ended up representing sin, and the 3-man slingshot was the power of Jesus to destroy the sin on the side of the building. And so there were lots of apples. I hope he cleaned up. So lots of apples all over the side of the building, and the 6th grade boys can't wait to come to religious ed. So it's great. So perfect story, right? But not like you would think. It is, but it's not. Because when Mike and I started dating, I had always been Catholic, and my faith had always been important. I went to church in college without anybody telling me. And I knew that God was part of my life. I knew that I could talk to him. I knew that I could rely on him. And I knew that he really worked in my life to make my life what he wanted it. And Mike was an atheist. And he wasn't raised in church at all. And I mean, not at all. They didn't go to church, not on Christmas and Easter. They didn't go. He went, I think, to be baptized because of Grandma. But the only church that he knew was what was on TV. And at that time, what was on TV was Jimmy Swaggart, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, and Oral Roberts. And so all of these televangelists, that it was pretty clear that they weren't in it for God, they were in it for the money, or the connections, or all kinds of things. I mean, many of them got arrested, and that's what he saw church at. Faith was supposed to be. And so all he saw was hypocrisy. Because the people who live their faith don't get news coverage. They don't get your attention because they're just quietly loving in the background, and that's not clickbait. That's not the thing that you're going to get attention for. And so that's all he saw. So he ended up coming to church with me, and he joined church choir. And if anybody who sat by us in church knows, he shouldn't be in church choir. He can't match a pitch. And if you watch our girls singing, cringing and laughing, especially if it goes all over the place, because he tries. He really enjoys the singing, even though he really shouldn't do it as loudly as he does. But he was in church choir solely for me. And he'll tell everybody. He was like, yep, I went to church, I was chasing a skirt, it's fine with me, it worked. And what I found out as we would come out of because he had to come to Mass. If you're in church choir, you've got to come to Mass. And he would come out asking these questions that I just couldn't believe. Like he had never heard the story of Adam and Eve. Who hasn't heard the story of Adam and Eve? He hadn't heard the story of Noah. And one time after going to midnight Mass with me, he came out and he goes, so how can Mary be pregnant if she's a virgin? I'm like, it's kind of the point. It's kind of central. It's called a miracle. And he was just like, that just doesn't make sense. I'm like, I know. That's the thing. So his faith was non-existent, and his family raised him to be self-reliant, that science was what was important. Science was what was real. You had to observe it, you had to measure it, or else it wasn't real. And so we had lots and lots of discussions where he was like, you've got to explain this, and I don't get it, and I'm not sure that you should get it. And we had a lot of discussions where I'm like, I don't know how you don't get it, because it's pretty real. And so we went through these things, went through college. So why would I marry him? And I'll tell you, people that know us today don't believe me on two aspects in that story. They don't believe that I ever would have married an atheist, and they don't believe that he ever was. Because my faith was so important to me that when he asked me to marry him, I knew he was right for me. I knew I could share everything about myself with him except for this faith part. But even in the faith part, he supported me. Even though he didn't agree with me, even though he didn't understand it, he was in church choir. He was coming to Mass with me, and he would engage me. And it's kind of like that verse where Jesus says, don't be lukewarm, be hot or cold or I'll spit you out. Like, I can work with arguments. I can work with somebody who's wrestling. And I didn't know it at the time. I was like, God, can you just please knock him on the head and just open his eyes? I'm really tired of the discussions. But what I learned is he really wanted to understand. Those challenges and those questions were actually searching for knowledge. And even he, I don't think, really understood that. But something in me knew that this was who God had for me. And so, but it was enough, my faith was important enough to me that even knowing that, when he asked me to marry him, I said yes, but you have to come with me to Mass on Sundays for the rest of our lives, or else I will walk away. I will leave this. As much as I love you, as much as I think you're right, you have to come. And to his credit, the man cannot lie, and he won't lie. And so if he commits to something, he'll do it, and he said he'd agreed. And he came with me every Sunday. And there were occasional Sundays I regretted making him make that promise, because he would come out and he would just discuss and argue and this makes no sense, and why are they saying this? And so it was hard, but I will tell you that the perfect part of the story is that I was part of his journey to faith, but without him, I wouldn't be where I am in my faith. If I had married somebody and my faith was easy and I could just show up on Sunday and be a little involved and I never had that challenge, I wouldn't have this gift of evangelization that I have. I wouldn't have this passion to tell you about Jesus, because I know him more deeply than I ever would have without these questions that made me figure out why I believe what I believe. Without these challenges from him in love, that he was like, you cannot just stand there and tell me it just is. You need to explain it. You need to understand it so that I can understand it, because I won't let you stop until you understand it enough that I can understand it. And we brought each other to faith. And isn't that our role in marriage, is to bring each other to heaven? I never would have thought it would have worked out that way, but God did. And so he had my plan in his mind. So in this fearless love, I want to tell you that in your relationships, sometimes we have kind of these checklists. And I've heard sometimes talking to high school groups of kids, some speakers say, okay, here's what you need to have on your checklist for the person that you're going to marry. They have, and every single one of them is not my husband. I would have been like, gotta throw him out the door, because he did not share my faith. He did share my values, but he did not share my faith. He, didn't understand what I was talking about. And so just right there, first thing, I would have had to throw him away. Well, God, anytime you tell God your plans, he kind of laughs and nah, that's not my plan for you. So don't be afraid to love somebody just because they don't fit what your plan is. Know that God has a plan for you. And so if that's his plan, then that's where you're supposed to be. And the main thing in that is to discern whether or not that is where God is calling you. But don't be afraid that's where he's calling you. I will tell you, it was 16 years before he came to faith. So it wasn't like yesterday, or today and tomorrow, we got married and then the next week he's like, I believe. He had his first communion the year after our first daughter had her first communion. So it was a long, long process, and there was lots and lots of prayer in there. But God is good. God is good. So if you're open to God's plan and you're not sure anything's happening, so, okay, fine, if I've got somebody that doesn't necessarily agree with all my values or doesn't, have the same faith that I do. But what if nothing's happening? What if there isn't anybody? Now what do I do? And sometimes we are called to wait. Sometimes we are called to sit in those moments of delay. And I want to read you a section in my book, Be Not Afraid. And it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And it's of Abram And it talks about how we trust in those moments when God's just saying, not now, not yet, not this. And what I love about this story is it just kind of starts. It just says, God just shows up. And here's what he says. This word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. I will make your reward very great. Thanks. And as I was going through kind of looking at these be not afraid statements, I'm like, what does that even mean? Right? So you got to read the story around it to see. But what happens is Abram immediately responds, "Oh Lord God, what good will your gifts be if I keep being childless and have as my heir the steward of my house, Eliezer?" Abram continued, "See, you have given me no offspring, and so one of my servants will be my heir." So he's a little sassy. He's like, "Great, I don't want it." And so God is this wonderful father who doesn't go to your room kind of thing. He takes Abram gently outside and says, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if you can. Just so," he added, "shall your descendants be." Abram put his faith in the Lord, who credited it to him as an act of righteousness. So there are so many things in this small section that I think we can take away in our own times of delay, whether it's in relationship, whether it's in lives, health, any delays that we are faced with. And that's that God is faithful. And he comes to Abram and he says, "I gotcha." I'm like, "I gotcha." But then Abram said, "No, you don't." I don't buy it. I don't believe it. And what I love in that is God reminds us all the time. He speaks to us all the time and says, "No, I'm here." And I have people tell me all the time, God doesn't speak to me. And then they immediately tell me 2 or 3 times that God has spoken to them. He speaks to you, I promise. He is speaking. But we don't always understand that it's him. And then we don't understand that it's a conversation and that we can respond. And especially that we can respond in frustration. So many of us feel like we can't tell God we're frustrated with him. And let me tell you, he already knows, right? He knows how you feel. And it makes me think of going to Adam and Eve after they have taken the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God comes into the garden and says, "Where are you?" He knows exactly where they are. Why does he ask? Because he wants them to come to him and talk to him. He goes to Cain and says, "Where's your brother?" And Cain's like, "I don't know, not my job." But he knows exactly where Cain's brother is. He wants Cain to talk to him. So he comes to Abram. And I don't know if his intention was for Abram to say, "Look, you haven't given me anything." But he comes to Abram, and Abram comes right to him and says, "This is great. You're going to be my sword and shield, but it's useless. You promised me a child, and I don't have it yet. And I'm 75. And God listens to that. And Abram stays and listens to God's response. That's another place that we stop. We tell God we're angry, and we leave. But we don't wait for God to comfort us and to tell us, wait, I've got a plan. I've got you. And so when Abram goes outside and looks at the sky, what does he see? How many stars do you think he sees?
0.
Like, they're uncountable. But if you follow the story, so he goes outside, he sees these stars, he's like, "You're right." So he hears God saying, "I do have a plan for you. I do have your future in mind, and I have promised you this child, and I will give you this child. So count the stars." And then Abram says, "Okay." And God says, "We're going to be in covenant. So go get the animals, split them, and you sit by them, and I will walk between them to show you that I am in covenant with you." And Abram sits and he guards, and the sun sets. So he went out at noon. There's the sun. He saw no stars. But somehow Abram said, "That means that your promise is real." I would have been like, "And we're done." This makes no sense. And I've heard the explanation, well, the stars are hidden and, you can't see them, but they're there. Abram wouldn't have known that. He would have seen the sun, and that's it. So what did he know? He knew that this was a promise of future deliverance. That at some point the sun was going to set and one star was going to appear. And then another, and then another. And then before you knew it, the sky would be filled with innumerable stars. And that's what happened, isn't it? There was Isaac, and then Isaac had Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob had 12 sons and a daughter. And then all of a sudden there's this tribe of Israel and this nation of Israel, and there are more people than you can count. But it starts very small, and it starts in the future. And after this, he still waits 25 more years. And I thank God I did not have to wait 25 years for my husband to come to faith. But sometimes it just takes a while, and we just need those moments of God saying, I have it, and I know you, and I remember you. I have not forgotten you, but I have a plan for you in the meanwhile. And that's where I need you to be. And so that promise is something that in our fearless love, we don't need to be afraid of. We don't need to be afraid to wait. We need to be able to trust that God has got you in his hands and that his plan for you will be fulfilled. So what if you're in a relationship and there are those challenges and you're not sure if those challenges really should be overcome? So for me with my husband, those challenges should have been overcome. We were meant to be together, and we were meant to bring each other to heaven. But sometimes they're just not. They're just too much. And I want to just start with, no relationship is perfect, obviously. But there are some warning signs and some things that we may kind of have some ideas or some thoughts that are close to what we should be thinking, but they're not quite. And that's really everything with, anything that just falls short of the mark of God. Anything that's just, it's close, but it's just not quite. It's okay, but it's not great. And so some of those things that I could have easily fallen into in my relationship with my husband is I need to fix him. Like, I need to be with him because I need to fix him, because he's not getting to heaven without me. And that never would have worked, because it was not my job. I tried, but it was not my job. And it was very clear it was God's job. And so it ended up being that, so these changes, all of us need to change. All of us need to grow. And so I got to be a part of that. And that was a blessing for me. So like I said, it's close, but it's not quite. If there's something like, well, if this changes, then it will be fine. That's not something to bring into a marital relationship, ever. It needs to be like, if this changes, it would be great. But if it never does, it's good. So again, we will all change. We all have growth that will happen. And that's something that you will try and do together. But if it's something that is a requirement beforehand, that's just not going to work. That's not the place to do it, is in a marital relationship. And then just the fear of being alone. That if I leave this relationship, then I'm alone. And that fear can keep you in something that really is getting in the way. Instead of, like I did with my husband, and not that I'm perfect, I keep holding myself up, I am not perfect at all. But with my husband, he asked me to marry him, and I wanted nothing more in the world than to marry him. But I would have left if he wouldn't come with me. If he was going to make me be that mother with the children who say, why isn't Daddy at Mass? Why do I have to go if he doesn't have to go? I wouldn't be that mom. And I knew that that's what our future would be, and I was willing to walk away from it and be alone, because that would be better. So if you know that God has this plan for you and that he loves you, he adores you, then being alone really isn't alone. He's with you at all times. And so then it's okay. And I have a couple stories with that. And the first is a friend of mine who, we were talking, and she was in this dating relationship, and there were some challenges, and we were talking about, so is this the right relationship, just something I need to keep working on, or is it not? And we decided to pray. So going back to that, pray. Because if you really want to find who God has for you and what God's plan is for you, you can't do it without talking to him. And that's how we talk to him, is you just pray. And so we prayed together and said, you know what, if this is the wrong relationship, get in the way. Get rid of it and get me ready for the right relationship. And so she left, and I saw her a few weeks later, and she came back in shock and said, it's over. And the next weekend, it was very clear it was done. And something happened, and the whole thing fell apart. She's like, I did not expect that. And what happened? And why is this happening? And why was this so bad all of a sudden? You asked. This is what you asked for. It's called answered prayer. But it was so fast that I'm like, honey, he's got somebody in the wings for you. This was in the way. And so he cleared it. So watch. And sure enough, I think it was within a month, she found the man who is now her husband. And he's perfect. He's perfect. And she's like, it's so easy. Everything fits, it's just right, it's comfortable. And not that they don't have, like I said, nothing is perfect, not that they don't have what were you thinking? But there's this foundation that's perfect, and it was for him. And so there's a prayer that I want to give to you that really in any kind of discernment, I've done it a whole bunch. I actually did it with my 2 daughters as they were going to college. Had a friend who did it. Different friends have used this prayer because I'm like, this thing works, but you better watch out because you're asking. And I call it my door prayer. So when my daughters were going to college, they both wanted to go out of state, and I have 4 children, so I'm like, good luck with that. And you better get a scholarship. And there was lots of debate over where they should go, and I don't know, they don't know, and finally realized God knows. He knows where they're supposed to be. He knows what's best for them, what's going to help them to grow the most, get them where they need to be in their lives, in their careers, in their vocations. And so we need to ask. And so we started praying, Lord, open the door where they're supposed to go wide, make it so clear, and close all the rest. And when you go into any discernment process like this, in a relationship, in a job, or whatever, those open doors are amazing, but the closed doors are cause for celebration instead of dismay. Because when she got no scholarship from a college that she should have, and an apology letter from another one because the scholarship was so small, we were like, well, now we need to look to the open door. Like, this one's not open, put that away. We didn't have to dwell on it. We don't sit at the closed doors. We look for the open. And sure enough, for both of them, there was one door, only one. Now, my engineer husband was like, do you know how close they got to not going to college? Like, again, answered prayer. Like, this was what we asked for. So in relationships, it can be the same. Like, if I'm not supposed to be in this relationship, shut that door. And when that door shuts, be grateful that God is clearing the path so that the person who is right can come through. Because we can block ourselves because we're afraid of, being alone, or that, we have this need to fix, or this, this different desire than what God has in his desires for us. So don't be afraid in a relationship that's not right. Don't be afraid to leave. This is fearless love, because it's love that calls you to something else, to something more. And that wrong relationship is completely in the way of the right one. So all of these have been talking about going towards marriage, relationships that are going towards marriage. But there's another relationship, because we've been talking about finding the person who's perfect for us. But what if you're called to be in relationship with the perfect person? What if that's your calling? So it's a lot like marriage. It's a covenant relationship. It's a permanent relationship, whether it's in religious life or consecrated as a priest and clergy. But it's so much more, right? It is giving your entire life to Jesus. And I will say that, through the process of coming to faith with my husband, my faith really exploded. And I had this moment of, I never know what to call it, but kind of this Pentecost, where my faith just got so much deeper. And I've had many times that I've just been in this state of grace, this state of prayer, that I'm like, I just would love to spend my life here. And it's not when there's a lot of laundry and the kids are being a pain. It's when it's going to God saying, I don't ever want to leave you. But I've been called to another vocation, and I love my vocation. I love my children. I love my husband. But a vocation that's dedicated to Jesus is this beautiful dedication, this beautiful covenant. And I love hearing people's stories of how they were called to that relationship, because it's always an invitation. It's never a decision. It's not a job decision. It's not I'm really good at counseling people, so I should be a priest. Or I'm really good at praying, so I should be a nun. It's not ever that. I had a priest in Round Rock when we lived up there, and he talked about his conversion story. He was at Mass one time, or sitting in prayer, and he had this vision of Jesus holding him in his lap and saying, I want you to be my priest. And he's like, no, you don't. You must not know me very well. I am not a good guy. And Jesus is like, no, I want you as my priest. And he's like, okay, that's crazy. But he did. He dedicated his life. And he said the next 6 months, Jesus took his life and shattered it like a teacup against a brick wall and then he put it back together in this way that he couldn't even imagine ever having lived. And then he became this priest who, for me, was very central in my explosion of faith. He was somebody who understood what I was going through. When, my faith, I had faith. It wasn't that I didn't have any, but it was completely transformed. And I went into him like, I'm that teacup right now. And he knew exactly where I was and could just walk with me in that. And it was amazing because I walked into him and it had just been happening. He said, I've been waiting for you. So he could see me coming. So he was this amazing priest who had this incredible insight and this gift that he gave to so many people. I knew a consecrated woman who talked about her calling, and she was in prayer. Again, pray. Everybody pray. But she was in prayer, and she wanted to be a mother. It was really important to be a mother for her. And in prayer, she heard Jesus in that moment say, I want to be your husband. Will you be with me for the rest of your life? And I will give you more children than you can have on your own. How do you turn that down? I mean, she couldn't. She had to go. And he gave her, she ended up being in this ministry called Challenge that works with young girls and middle school girls and high school girls and helps them to grow in their faith and really learn how to live their faith in this everyday life. And she had all of these children that she was praying for, that she was loving on, that she was caring for, and that she was encouraging. She didn't have to feed them dinner, but she prayed for them, and she was really, really there for their souls and was so happy that she had so many children. So that kind of a relationship, just like any of these relationships, are invitations to us. They're invitations to full commitment, to fully give ourselves. And any relationship that we're in should be based in Christ anyway. We should be coming from that place of living a life of Christ. And so in this fearless love, we should not be afraid to give ourselves fully to Christ, that he is perfect for us and that he can be enough. He will always be enough in whatever relationship that we're called to in our vocations. So in closing, we are called to love. That's what we're made for. We were created in the image of God, and it wasn't physically. God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him. 1 John 4:16. And Matthew 5:48 tells us, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. We are called to be like our Father, perfect in love. Jesus tells us, love one another as I have loved you. He loved us completely to the end, enough to give his life for us. This is how we're to love each other. It is fearless. He wasn't afraid of death for us. And the greatest commandment is centered on love. Love your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the foundation of all of our relationships. And so why this big focus on love? It's because we are made in God's image. And God's image is Father and Son, and the love between them is so much that it creates another. It creates the Holy Spirit. And if our love is true and reflecting of God's love, it creates life. It creates blessing. Whether it is in a child or whether it is a spiritual life, it creates. It is never meant to be focused in on itself. Any marriage is never meant for that love to focus in on itself. It is meant to be a source of blessing, as Abraham was a source of blessing for the world. And so whatever relationship we have, we are called to live this kind of love, whether it is in marriage, and whether it is in ending a relationship, in being single, or in consecrated life. And so that's what fearless love looks like, and that's what I challenge you to go and live today. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
I'll start. Do your children have a checklist?
No, they don't. And that was...
Do you have a checklist?
No. Because specifically, do my children have a checklist for who they should marry? and it's hard. I had to think about that long and hard because honestly, it would have been so much easier if I had married somebody who was Catholic. It would have been much easier for me, but it would have been wrong. And so I just have to pray that, whoever they marry is somebody that I like and they like, and it's going to help them in their faith. And hopefully that's going to be somebody that it's pretty easy immediately. Because I can't tell them, oh, you shouldn't marry somebody who doesn't share your faith, because I did that, And so, no, I encourage them not to have a checklist, because they'll miss the person that God has for them. So, yes?
So I know human nature hasn't changed in the time that you're married, so we're probably still very vain and kind of public-facing or public considerate people. So I think social media nowadays has definitely amplified that.
Absolutely.
And so if someone were to see that, let's say I was dating someone who didn't share my faith or didn't share this very critical aspect of myself, what do you think the role of social media has done in not only making us not choose partners that don't check the list or fit the bill, but also in like screening out people who we meet somewhere, then we go creep on their Facebook.
Right.
Friend, of course. And then you see, blah, blah, they don't meet the list in that way.
Right. Yeah, so how has social media affected really how we approach relationships? And I think it's made it a lot harder. One, because, just any of the apps, like we have a friend who, started dating again, and after several years of marriage that, didn't work. And he was like, well, she's pretty, I'll check her out. Like, well, that's great. But, and his checklist was she has to have this look and this income and this, or whatever, like his, and so I think it encourages us to be very shallow, and you don't get to know, like my husband and I met each other when we were 15 and 16. So, I had to drive on our first date because he didn't have his license yet. So, but we kind of got to know each other. Like I had no intention of dating him. I just helped him with his math homework, and I'm like, oh, he's kind of a nice friend. And we just talked for a while, and then we're like, I kind of think you're nice and cute, and like, okay. But I got to know him first. And social media, I think, puts the pressure on knowing them last. And then having all of that put out for everybody to see. So if you end a relationship, well, I have to take it off of my, status, or I have to tell everybody, or when I'm in a relationship, well, I have to decide what that means, because I have to post on it, and I have to, say that and define it, instead of letting things grow gradually. So it definitely puts a lot more pressure. But at the same time, it's something that you can choose to engage in or not. So I have raised my kids in the isnt school district, and the pressure there is immense. I mean, it is immense. And it's really not my value, right? Like, you need to be the best person that you are supposed to be, and whether that's like top 10% or like 50% or, engineer or therapist or special ed teacher. Like, if that's your calling, that's your calling. And you don't have to go to Harvard. Like, please don't go to Harvard, because I can't afford Harvard. And so, and I've never been like that. But when my oldest daughter went to high school, I went to kind of the conversation that, okay, so here's what you're supposed to do. And all the talk was about college and how you're going to get into college. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to sign up for this and this and this and this. And I get home and I'm like, I don't have to do any of that. She needs to go to high school. And so you can be a part of that culture, and you have to be conscious about it. You have to be more conscious about it right now, I think. You cannot be a part of that culture.
What would you advise, I guess, if, say it was an atheist, you were dating someone with different Protestant, Baptist, what, if instead it would have been, yes, I'll go with you every Sunday, but maybe they asked for you to be present at their faith tradition, et cetera, et cetera. How do you work with that, and what would you, in that case, being your shoes, kind of asking the same thing, what would you have done?
Right. So I kind of have a story with that. So he was atheist, but about the time God was really starting to work with him, and I was praying really hard, had no idea that he was working with him, we moved down here and we went to St. John Newman and walked in, and there was some priest. I don't even know if the priest was there or just like a sub, but he had the thickest accent, and you couldn't understand a word that he said. I mean, not a word. And I'm pretty good with accents, but it was too thick for me even. And we came out, and my husband was like, I can't go here. We can't do this. Can we go to Lake Hills? I'm like, But it's the first, but he said he wanted to go somewhere. I'm like, we're going. Like, okay, we'll go to Lake Hills. And so we went, and, and it was great. There was a lot of praise, a lot of worship, and some really good messages. But then after a little while, he started to feel what I was feeling, is that it's missing something. And because it was big evangelization focus. And he was like, so I'm here, and you need to be giving me something. And you're really missing something. But in the time that we were there, I really felt God spoke to both of us. He had a witness there on the last Sunday that we went that was an engineer, and he gave his story, and he had every question that came out of my husband's mouth. I mean, like word for word. It's like, this is bizarre. And then said, well, after 20 years of marriage, I asked my wife on our anniversary if she would mind that I converted. And she, of course, said yes. And he said, I'm here to tell you, if you think that, if you're hoping that God's working on somebody, I'm here to tell you they are. And I'm like, 20 years? Like, oh my gosh. But at the same time, it was a message for him, like, here's all these questions, and here's where I found the answers. And it was this book, it was C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And it was the third time in a week that people had said, you ought to read that book. And I'm like, literally elbowing them, like, you better read that, because that's a brick. Like, you're going to get hit in the head if you don't start listening. So sometimes, like, I left for a time, because that was, but at the point of that, though, is that we were married at that point. And so I left because he had that desire, and I had to honor that, even though I knew that my faith was in the Catholic Church, and I desired my communion. I desired Eucharist. I desired that connection with Jesus. If somebody is of a different faith, again, that's something that you have to really see, because when you marry in the Catholic Church, you sign something and you commit to, like, raising your children in the Catholic faith and supporting your Catholic faith. And if that is what is central for you, that needs to be honored by your spouse. And so if you can do that, and maybe it's a both and, we go here, but we can also go here, sometimes that can work into this really complementary thing. And to me, that Protestant Catholic division is right now proving to me that what people intend for evil, God can intend for good. Because we have all of these Protestants who are coming in, like St. John Newman is 50% converts. And they're all coming in, and they're coming in going, we need Bible studies. And we need good Bible studies. And it's great. And, we have all this involvement in people who are just really wanting to dive into the Bible and have all this biblical knowledge. And then they come in and they receive the Catholic aspect, and it really fulfills all of it. So I would go in prayer and discernment and really ask God to make it clear, like, how is that balance meant to work out? Mm-hmm.
Have a comment.
Okay.
Maybe you can expand on just through the talk. And we know that St. John Paul II talks a lot about this free gift of self and the freedom to choose, right? Whomever it is that we are interested in, right? We get to choose that freely and full freedom. Mm-hmm. But then conversely, we have this also crippling fear, mm-hmm. which we know the evil spirit preys upon. We know when we're in desolation, that's fear, worry, confusion, secrecy, right? And then when we're in consolation, there's the joy, the faith, hope, and love, and those virtues that are present. Can you expand, or do you just have any general words of wisdom for, like, that discernment of that freedom opposite the fear? Because mm-hmm. I do think oftentimes, whether it is social media, whether it is pressure from others, mm-hmm. Or just now, I think this is scary, that vulnerability
right.
again.
Right.
Is
mm-hmm.
frightening, I think, at times.
Absolutely. And especially when you're looking at forever, if you're looking at marriage, like, okay, this is forever.
And
or
able to cooperate
right.
forever.
forever, right? Like ever and ever, and get through, like, it's, I mean, good in the good and in the bad, richer for poorer. Like, there's a reason, sickness and in health, there's a reason those negatives are in there. We're like, oh, for good and for great and for health and for all this. Like, no. There will be sickness, there will be bad, there will be difficulty. So, and even in like a consecrated life or a religious life, it's forever, right? So I think the thing is really to go, and that's why I think like the Bible is so wonderful with the number of times that God tells us not to be afraid. And it's really why I wrote the study that I did. I was going through those verses and realized just saying don't be afraid doesn't do anything. Like if I'm standing about to fall off a cliff and somebody says, don't be afraid, I'm like, thanks a lot, like that does me no good. I'm still terrified. But if they say, don't be afraid, because it looks far, but it's actually, I'm right underneath there, 2 feet down is a step and you're going to land on that. Like, oh, okay, and I can step down. I just couldn't see that. And so there's this explanation around it that God says, don't be afraid because here's where I am and here's how you find me. And in those moments of fear, I think there's a lot of discernment in seeing where that fear is coming from. Am I afraid of being alone? Am I afraid of other people's ideas of me? Am I afraid of being judged? Am I afraid of committing? And is that real? Right? And is that something I need to remove myself from? So if I'm afraid of what other people are going to think, then I need to separate myself from that. Whether it's emotionally or whether it's turning off Facebook or whether, whatever it is, being able to separate what is fearful and so that I can discern what is true. And that's, again, one of my favorite verses is when, you're upset or I'm frustrated or, I'm dealing with a pre-teenage daughter. I go to the one that says, and I believe it's in Ephesians, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is beautiful, think on these things. And when you go to those spaces and you find that, then you find the will of God. Because God's will, even when it's intimidating, has this peace about it. And I've been called into all kinds of things that I'm like, I do not want to go there. But there's this knowing in my heart, there's this peace in my heart that's like, but I can't not, because that's where I'm called to. And I know that He's going to be faithful, even though it sure doesn't feel like I can do this, And so it's finding those moments of peace and those moments of connection. All right, anything else? All right. Thank y'all so much. I appreciate it.